like to welcome all our TAC members, members of the subcommittee from our data working group and high frequency and automated trading working group as well. And obviously thank all of our witnesses who have agreed to participate on this panel and future panels, including our staff that are going to provide some background on all of this. This is our 12th full TAC meeting since its reconstitution in July of 2010. Our discussion today will include 3 panels. First is the SDR data harmonization. Second is Commission's recently published concept release on automated trading. And third, CEF registration and compliant and MAT submissions, which are the made available for trade submissions. When I reinstated the TAC Advisory Committee, not long after I joined the Commission, I did so with the goal of providing a means by which the industry and the Commission could work together to discuss and resolve issues related to technology. And for the past 2 years, I've held regular meetings of this organization to foster an open discussion and find innovative solutions to technology issues with respect to pre-trade functionality, data standards, automated and high-frequency trading, and most recently, customer protection, which is going extraordinarily well. Our first panel discussion today will be on making improvements to the data reporting to SDRs. We've been confronted by serious problems related to the CFTC's acceptance, aggregation, and analysis of data submitted to the repositories. In July 2012, the Commission finalized Parts 43 and 45 of the Commission regulations for both real-time and regulatory reporting for swaps transactions. However, because of the inconsistencies and errors in these rules and in the data, the Commission has not been able to effectively utilize the reported data. Accordingly, at the April 30th TAC meeting, I asked the Commission staff and the 3 temporarily registered SDRs to work on harmonizing the data and improving the reporting process field by field to ensure that the data is consistent, it is usable, regardless of how this is data submitted to the SDRs. Further, I've asked that this work be carried out through the TAC so that the process can be open to the public and benefit from thoughtful consideration by market participants. Using this feedback, we can hand over the work done by the TAC to the Commission for possible adoption in the future. Today, we will post the data harmonization chart, which John Rogers will present today, and on our TAC website. I've modified the TAC website to not only provide updates on the data harmonization efforts, and we're going to create an opportunity anybody that wants to comment on that effort, provide an area where we can accept letters. We've also taken the opportunity to link in all the existing SDRs and link them directly to their real-time reporting feed, so you can get everything you need in one-stop shopping right there on the TAC website. So I'm pleased that our first panel today will begin with John Rogers, Director of Office and Data Technology, to report on the progress made by the harmonization efforts, and he's joined by the 3 SDRs. Next, we'll hear from Richard Berner, Director of Treasury's Office of Financial Research, to discuss federal agency coordination, which is a very important issue. And then we'll hear from Nicolas Gauthier, the Policy Officer of International Markets and Services with the European Commission, who will provide the European perspective on our cross-border data issues. Mr. Gauthier has provided the international perspective, and we're honored to have him since he's come quite a ways to participate in this. Our second panel will address the Commission's recently published concept release on risk controls and system safeguards for automated trading environments. We will begin this second panel with an overview of the concept release by our staff, Sebastian Puljo-Schott, and who is the Associate Director of Market Oversight, and then begin a general discussion of the TAC members. Given that the concept release was published earlier this week and asked over 100 questions about very specific trading controls and their deployment in the market, I realize the TAC and the subcommittee members may not have had a chance to engage in a full analysis. However, we've spent a considerable amount of time on this issue in the past, and I believe that this will certainly give us an opportunity to explore the issues we've already addressed. And I think on all of your tables, we've put a summary, a 20-page summary of all the issues that we've discussed previously at TAC meetings on pre-trade functionalities and different presentations we've received. We've attempted to summarize those in order to help you review that. I believe this is a very important topic. and the TAC has been working to understand the impact of automated and high-frequency trading on our markets. I'd also note the SEC is holding a hearing today on the recent NASDAQ trading troubles to better understand their negative impacts technology has had on their markets as well. I'd like to thank our TAC members as well as the members of the Subcommittee on Data Standards and High-Frequency Trading for their hard work on issues related to the automated trading and pre-trade functionality. This body of work includes a working definition of high-frequency trading as well as recent TAC documents which I referenced. I'd like to build on that work and understand how these issues will be affected by our concept release. A couple of questions I'd like to ask, and I pose them right now, is I'd like to learn more about the technology that is deployed today, as well as its effectiveness. I think we provided a cursory overview in our testing and supervision document, but I know there's a lot more work and a lot more efforts, especially at the exchange levels that are deployed today to make sure that our markets operate effectively. So I'll certainly look to the exchange leaders to kind of reflect on that. Second, I'd like to understand whether there is a need for regulatory action with regard to any of these measures currently in the market. In other words, should the Commission act to federalize current industry practices? Finally, it would be beneficial to receive feedback on the possibility of a registration requirement for firms operated trading systems that are not otherwise regulated by the Commission. The concept release cites the definition of floor broker as a potential basis for such a requirement. I'm interested to get public input on whether this provision or any other provisions in our statute or regulation can serve as a legal basis for that registration. Finally, I'd like to, an issue that should be very exciting and that we've been receiving a lot of feedback very recently is on the swap execution facilities and the made available for trade determinations. The third panel will raise a variety of issues that I've heard, I hopefully will hear from, on CEF and the CEF participants that are facing due to the rapidly approaching CEF trading compliance date. We're only 20 days away from our October 2nd deadline. This means that we only have a few days to before ribbon cutting ceremonies and to get everybody up and running to get, and obviously with that comes the shutdown of exempt commercial markets and exempt boards of trade. As of today, the staff has registered temporarily 3 CEFs from 2 entities, and we have about 15 more applications to review and complete by the October 2nd deadline. I'm aware of concerns from different market participants regarding various interpretations of the CEF rules and a number of operational challenges that they've raised. I'd like to have an open discussion on the number of issues surrounding onboarding, clearing certainty, uniformity of CEF rulebooks, and the status of the made available for trade determinations, which we have not yet seen. And of course, finally, we'd like to have some understanding and discussion on the recognition of foreign trading platforms, and we will call on Nicholas again to provide the European perspective. To address these issues, we'll have David Van Wagner, and I believe Ananda Ranakrishna will also present from our staff as well. Let me thank everyone for attending today, and I look forward to addressing these issues on all 3 panels. And let me turn to the chairman for his remarks.
I want to thank all of the participants of this advisory committee for participating today, but more than just your participation today, your advice to us comes at a very interesting time in the swaps market. Your advice seems it's always interesting, but today it's a particularly interesting time. I want to thank Commissioner Scott D for his thoughtful leadership of this committee, not only bringing it back to life, Scott, but I think you've really brought the best of market participants' advice to this commission. I say that just thinking about one thing we did this week. This concept release we put out was so informed. I know we put out 124 questions, so it seems like your work has just begun, and others in that regard. I want to thank my fellow commissioners. I don't know if Bart's on the phone, but Mark Wiegand, who is here, and Bart Chilton. Bart also remarkable amount of time and effort into the concept release that we just put out, so I want to thank him as well. I look forward to each of the 3 panels that Scott reviewed: swap data reporting, the Commission's concept release, and swap execution facilities. In terms of data, it's a remarkable time where we are. The public and regulators are now benefiting from a new market transparency. Let's think about it. The public starting last December 31st and through a series of implementation dates that ran through August 19th, now can see the price and volume of each swap transaction as it occurs, sometimes with some time delay. Sometimes it's all the way up to 48-hour time delay if it's an energy swap between two end users, but sometimes it's as soon as technologically practicable, the words that Congress used for the marketplace. And with most of these compliance dates behind us, there is $410 trillion notional value of swaps reporting into the data repositories. I will repeat that again. It's $410 trillion, and that's with no double counting. So if Commissioner Amalia entered into a trade with me and we happen to clear it on any of the clearing houses in this room, I won't just pick you out, Tom. By the way, welcome to Tom Farley, who's just joined the committee. But it could be to Brian's clearinghouse, and is LCH here? I don't know. All right, but no double counting. So that's $410 trillion notional amount are in the data repositories, and that means the real-time reporting is on that body as well. And for the first time, the public's getting to see that. There is another compliance date on September 30th. These are for the transactions for far-flung affiliates of U.S. persons, the so-called guaranteed affiliates that will come in on September 30th. But by and large, that's a pretty big data set. Now, there's still work to be done, as this committee will advise us, as other committees will. John Rogers is working so closely with the 3 registered swap data repositories, and that our friends from the Treasury OFR are helping us out so much on. It's really, to me, at a core about making sure that the data that's in the data warehouses is, 1, reliable, and 2, accessible. That regulators can access it, that there's a way to sort it, filter it, come to some judgments, whether it's by counterparty, whether it's by trade date, whether it's by product, and that's going to be a journey. I mean, we might be 9 months into this, but there's still work to be done. Second, I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you on the concept release. The release, I think, a thoughtful set of questions intended to stir public debate, and I have no doubt there will be some public debate about that, but that's, I think, good. The goal of the CFTC is to best protect the functioning of the markets for the benefits of farmers and ranchers and merchants and other end users who rely on the markets to hedge risk. But we've witnessed a fundamental shift in markets, from human-based trading to highly automated trading. Automated trading systems, yes, including high-frequency trading, but this concept release was largely just focused on automated trading systems, enter the market and execute in a matter of milliseconds without human involvement. And our statistics show that electronic trading is now over 91, nearly 92% of the futures market. And as we move to swap execution facilities, as we move to centrally cleared swaps, one could expect similar ratios in time in the swaps market as well. So in our oversight of these derivative markets, both futures and swaps, I think the CFTC must look continually to adapt our regulations in changing times. And our mission to promote transparency and ensure market integrity, prohibit abuses, is just as important in a fast-moving electronic world as it is when it's by phone or even when it was on a pit or in a pit or on a trading floor. We've already taken a number of steps. You're familiar with them. You've debated them. I think we've been trying to keep abreast of the rapidly changing environment in the 21st century. We've adopted rules on pre-trade risk filters. You all have helped debate 1.73, 1.74, and your friendly comments on those rules have helped us. We've adopted many other rules around designated contract markets and swap execution facilities. But I dare say I don't think our work's done, and that's why we put out the concept release to get your public feedback in this ever-changing world. And as sure as computers and programs have had technical glitches in the past, Commissioner Amalia mentioned the NASDAQ, though that was in the securities field, I believe there will be glitches in the future. I think that's just the nature of this reality we're in. And thus, I think we have to look for risk controls and system safeguards to protect markets when such glitches occur inevitably. I don't think we can sort of just say, oh, we won't have them. The same way I think there will be firms that fail from time to time, and that's part of capitalism, and that's part of having a freedom to fail. So I think it's a matter of making sure that clearinghouses, the trading venues, yes, the data repositories as well, are robust enough and resilient that when somebody has a glitch or fails, that we ensure that the central functioning of the markets continue. Commissioner Amaya was good enough to put a panel on swap execution facilities. And with swap execution facilities, we will have additional transparency in the market for pre-trade transparency. In essence, all market participants will be able to have access, because the two core features of swap execution facilities, impartial access, and that there is an order book that somebody can leave a live executable bid or offer in. They may choose not to use it. They might go the RFQ route or another route, but there will be impartial access and order books for those who want to use it. I think really does help competition and access in the market. The key compliance date of October 2nd, 20 days away. As we know, we have 3 that swap execution facilities registered. I think overall we have 17 applications, meaning 14 plus the 3. We've heard from 3 or 4 others, so we now have that universe of approximately 15 to 20. What does it mean? In October, given that all these platforms will have impartial access and order books, means anyone who wants to come into the market and compete with these new tools will be able to do so. This is truly a paradigm shift, and we understand that there are going to be issues that arise. And just as we have for the clearing mandate, just as we have for swap dealer registration that started 9 months ago, just as we continue to do with the 3 swap data repositories here, we want to work with market participants to smooth this transition. And as you have, know that once the CEFs become live, there's going to be some data reporting changes. That this traditional reporting in the last 9 months from the dealers, some of that will shift to the CEFs. So we're going to need to work through that. We might find that there's time issues and other ways that we'll need to smooth those issues as data reporting protocols change. Clearing protocols may change, and so forth. Participant, as I was walking around, I heard some issues about participant agreements. We want to hear from you, and if you have an issue, that's David Van Wagner and Nancy Markowitz. I just want to make sure you know. I hope, and that's at cftc.gov, please. I encourage everyone to please let us know of your issues, because we want to smooth this transition, and we appreciate it is a very fundamental shift. Before I close, I want to do a bit of a shout out both to market participants and the CFTC, and it's about central clearing. We worked together over 4+ years on bringing a central clearing mandate together. Congress, the President, the international community, the European Union, and that's represented well here, in Japan and so forth, now all have clearing mandates. Our clearing mandate had 3 key trade implementation dates. The last and final one passed September 9th of this year. So the interest rate market and credit index market, by and large, we've implemented these mandates. The 4 interest rate curves represent approximately 90% of the interest rate curves. I mean, there are other currencies, but that's about 90% of the interest rate curves. And what have we found? When we look in the data repositories today, about half of the interest rate market in our jurisdiction, so about I said there's about $410 trillion in the data repositories. I don't recall the exact number, but it's between 360 and 370 trillion of that's interest rate swaps. And about half of that is cleared, or a little bit more than half. In 2008, looking at data on the ISDA website, so I'll quote them, 21% of the market was cleared in interest rate swaps in December of 2008. 5 years later, it's half. We have one additional compliance date. It's October 9th, when the far-flung operations of U.S. enterprises. Their guaranteed affiliates and branches will come into central clearing, as well as the P.O. Box hedge funds. This is basically if you have a principal place of business here in the U.S., but you happen to be incorporated in the Cayman Islands, which is probably 3/4 or 90% of the U.S. hedge fund community. That too has to come into clearing. So I would anticipate that as we move into 2014, you will see this number grow to closer to 2/3 of the market, 2/3 of the interest rate market being in the central clearing. A big shout out to the market because it wasn't easy. There's still issues. We need to hear those issues, but a particular shout out to the CFTC staff and my fellow commissioners, and a thank you. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe we have Commissioner Chilton.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner O'Malley, Chairman O'Malley, for this, and I appreciate the chairman's comments, too. I just want to make a couple real quick points. One, I've been concerned that with all the technology out there, I mean, they're doing a great job. There's all sorts of wild things going on. They're killing it. I just want to make sure that they're not killing end users or killing markets or killing consumers. And I think all too often we've just accepted that technology is all good. And, look, at times technology's made a big hot mess of markets. And I think this concept release goes a long way to helping us figure out what we need to do to be a little bit ahead of the curve. We're not ahead of the curve now, and there are some basic things that I hope don't take a year. I hope we can get something out by the end of this year with regard to what we may do, and that's what I'm interested in hearing about today. Those things are registration, testing, and creating an environment, by the way. The exchanges, I think, should create an environment for testing by the cheetahs, by the HFTs and ASTs. And then finally, kill switches. So those three things: registration, testing, kill switches. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention I continue to be concerned about things that look to me, and I think to a lot of others, like they may be wash sales. I think those have the possibility. I think at times they have contorted markets. I was pleased to learn that the Intercontinental Exchange is requiring mandatory self-trade prevention mechanisms. Mandatory, that's huge and it's important. And I think that may be sort of the industry best practices standard. So I'm interested in learning about that and hearing more about that today. So thank you again, Commissioner O'Malley, Chairman O'Malley, and thanks to my colleagues. I've got Chris Haymeyer with me here who is going to participate too, but we're pleased that he was able to join me here in Chicago. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Commissioner O'Malley. Thanks to the panelists and participants today. I'm looking forward to a good series of discussions on all these different topics. I'm going to limit my remarks to just one of the topics, and that's CEFs. And the chairman and I talked about this issue a little bit this morning, and there have been a number of conversations in light of the CEF applicants now coming in and submitting their forms, and also making a number of different interpretations about what our rules regarding CEFs actually mean. And so that's creating a host of questions and issues for the commission. But I want to talk just a minute about the cross-border element to all of this and to the trading platforms. And I think all of us commissioners shared this view when we adopted the guidance, that what we're trying to accomplish in the guidance as it related to execution was to, where we could, avoid liquidity fragmentation. That was something that I talked about quite a bit over the summer. It was part of the discussions we had internally here in the waning weeks before we finalized the guidance. And given the applicants that have come in so far, it would seem that this shouldn't be much of a concern. It would seem that the vision of the guidance seems to be materializing, but we have picked up some anecdotes here and there that there might be a platform or two, or perhaps more, located outside the United States that might have concerns about permitting access to their platform out of fears that some other obligation by the CFTC might be triggered. And so the only thing I wanted to say about this is that, again, I think our policy is designed to prevent fragmentation, and to the degree there are any sort of concerns, be it with registration or anything else, I would hope that those platforms approach the Commission and begin a dialogue with the staff and with the commissioners to see if there's not some way we can figure out whatever issues they might have and find a solution to them. And in fact, there's a conversation regarding a specific platform outside the United States that's already underway here at the Commission, and the chairman and the staff have been able to consider a lot of different novel ways of addressing a variety of problems concerning compliance and implementation that this platform presented to the Commission. So that was just the one message I wanted to relay here in this public setting, that, again, if there are platforms outside the United States that have liquidity providers from the United States and have one issue or another, that they should really come talk to the agency and figure out some way, enter into a dialogue to see if we can't figure out some way to address whatever problems they might have, because we want to make sure that these platforms that have liquidity providers from all parts of the globe are competing on something other than regulation, so long as the regulation is equal or comparable. We don't want platforms competing with each other based on regulation. That, again, was what we expressly try to avoid in the guidance. And there might be some circumstances in some places where that's not going to be the case, but by and large, it should be the case that any given platform should be able to attract participants from all over the globe, and do so and comply with home country regulations, but also match up pretty well with CFTC regulation. Again, all in an effort to make sure that they're competing on services and technology, these platforms, instead of on regulation. So again, I just encourage every platform that has any of these sort of issues to approach the Commission, and we look forward to having those conversations.
Thank you, Commissioner Weegan. We're going to begin with our first panel. We're going to lead with John Rogers, and then we'll go to Richard and then Nicholas. So John, you in the three CEFs, the three SDRs. We look forward to your presentation. Take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Commissioner Amalia. Good morning, everyone. I should start by noting that all statements and opinions expressed by me do not represent, are my own, and do not represent the views of any commissioner or the Commission. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I want to take you back to where we were on April 30th, just to start the conversation. We have an effort going on that we call a data harmonization effort. But really it is four components rolled into one, and these are the four components. And this is a slide from the last presentation. So there is the harmonization in and of itself, and I think of harmonization from the perspective, from multiple perspectives. Harmonization within an asset class, is the information represented in a consistent manner within an asset class? Within an SDR, is that representation consistent across asset classes within an SDR? And then within an SDR, I should say, and then across SDRs, is the information represented the same way? Because ultimately our goal is to be able to use information both within an SDR and then across SDRs for our regulatory purposes. Data quality, what exactly are we doing to ensure data quality? How can we improve data quality? It's a constant issue. There are different levels of validation that occur, as would be expected, and there's a constant move to improving data quality. Accessibility, which is how do we get access to the data? How do, there are really two methods: data delivered to us versus data on the portal, on each SDR's portal, and how do we improve that accessibility so that we can do the aggregation that Chairman Gensler mentioned, and then analytics. So in that sense, there are two categories of information. There are operational statistics. How much information are we getting in? What are the issues? What are the changes that we're making from a capability perspective, but then also the analytics from the business perspective in terms of the analysis that our chief economist's office might do, or from a surveillance perspective. So those are the things that we have been focusing on since we began this effort and since we presented in April. The effort has been a highly collaborative effort between CFTC and all of the SDRs. There has been really two tracks as it relates to that as well. The first is CFTC has been working on a regular basis with each SDR individually on specific circumstances related to the data in their SDR, whether it is on quality, whether it is on harmonization, whether it is on understanding how their portal works and how to use it, or how to utilize the data. And those are regular conversations that go on. But then there are cross SDR meetings where we're talking about the phase 1 field list that Commissioner O'Malley mentioned, and talking about what those fields are, what our understanding is of why those data elements are important, and making sure that we have a common understanding of how that information is represented, so that we can bring information and make use of it across the different SDRs. That's both of those activities, I would say, certainly on a weekly basis we've been getting together, but I would actually venture to say that it's for the most part on a daily basis that we've been getting together, working through these issues. Our efforts have focused on the data elements that are in multiple parts of the regulation. There's been a lot of focus on, in our internal conversations and probably elsewhere, around Part 45 and the pet fields that are in the appendix on Part 45. But our focus is also on 43 and 49, basically all of the rules where data would be flowing into the SDRs and how we can harmonize based on that. Granted, 45 is the biggest component of that, but it's just one set of the data. We're not limiting our discussion about that. One of the key components in our effort has been, though, to focus on the data that is already in the SDR, not necessarily focusing it from the submitter to the SDR, but rather our view, CFTC's view, of what information that it needs to perform its regulatory function, and how can the SDR data be harmonized so that we can make use of that data in the most effective way. It's a nuance, but it's an important nuance as we think about the relationship of how data flows in to the SDR and how the Commission uses it. Ideally, of course, if the information flowing in is 100% harmonized and standardized, flowing into each SDR exactly the same way, it's easier to use on the back end. But that is something that we are working towards, but our focus has been on the relationship of the CFTC to the SDR, part of that interface. In the interest of getting through actually discussions and having meaningful dialogue on it, we've been focusing on credit as the first asset class. When we first started looking at information, we were thinking about all of the data everywhere all the time, and that becomes problematic because there's such high volumes of data. But then when you think about different asset classes, there are differences, of course, in that data. So in the interest of moving away from the notion of having conversations about how one particular element is different in its representation in the other commodity asset class versus the credit asset class versus the interest rate asset class, we focused on the credit space. But the notion was, when we picked our first set of phase 1 fields, the fields that we've been focusing on harmonizing right now, we've been saying all along, in so much as this harmonization activity can be applied to all asset classes, please do so. And I believe that effort is underway as well. But we will be turning our attention as we move forward with this initiative towards the other asset classes in earnest, but hopefully be gaining the leverage from the existing phase 1 activities to apply, so that we're not having each phase take the same amount of time. it's important to focus on, or to talk about what things we're really not focusing on, though, because we've been asked questions about the notion of, when you talk about harmonizing data, are you talking about it from the perspective of data that is being sent to CFTC or data that is available on the portal? And the answer to that question is actually both. We're not trying to make we're not trying to distinguish between the where the data is presented. If the data needs to come back here, we want it to be represented exactly the same way as it would be on the portal. There are different uses for this data with people of different technology skill sets or different complexities in terms of manipulation. So when CFTC is wanting to look at particular information, the portal representation should be an exact reflection of the data if they exported the data from the SDR and brought it back to the Commission. The other thing that has come up is, are we talking about a particular schema? Are we talking about a flavor of XML, FixML, or FPML? We're really focused on the content of the data and understanding the meaning of the fields and how that meaning is represented, more so than whether it's delivered to us in FPML or FixML. That will come with time, but if the method of transport to us is not nearly as significant as understanding how to make the most effective use of the data. So that's where our focus has been. The other thing that has been happening with this effort, we've identified a number of fields. I remember when we talked on April 30th, I was referring to a list of 22 fields. Well, we've moved away from that because in the dialogue with the SDRs, 22, that number has changed. So we coined the term the phase 1 element of fields instead of saying, well, the 22 is really 33 now and that sort of thing. What we are doing is developing an action plan on a field-by-field basis. If we understand how to harmonize this information, how is that harmonization going to be implemented on a field-by-field basis across the SDR? We achieve a common understanding. If that common understanding means that there is no change in the SDR at all, then that is great. If it turns out that there is a change, well, when is that change going to be implemented? So we've been working towards action plans in collaboration with the SDRs on that effort. The other thing that I wanted to mention, just as an outcropping of the last TAC meeting, was we had industry participants helping us with this harmonization activity, and I wanted to thank them because their help has been very valuable. Specifically, FIA has contributed to working with us on the harmonization effort. ISDA has worked with us as well, NFA and others. And I appreciate that because they've been helping from the perspective of looking at things from a XML schema perspective or thinking about how elements get broken down. So that's a very much appreciated effort. I wanted to get into the next phases of this. The phase 2 effort will be to identify additional elements, and we've identified more, but we haven't begun that effort. We will continue to focus on the credit asset class. We are not working this effort in a serial manner. We are working on phase 1. We will start phase 2 before phase 1 ends, and so that we can continue to move things along. One of our keen focuses has been on certain core issues, for example, the impact on the entities submitting the data, so that we understand and are trying to work within the CFTC SDR framework and but be mindful of the impact of who's submitting the data to us. We're very mindful of the release cycles that the SDRs have in terms of making improvements to their portal, not just for us, but for others, and trying to work within their release cycles. Very mindful of the notion that for some of these areas, especially UPI in particular, there are global standards that will emerge, and thinking about how those are utilized, leveraged. In other words, not trying to invent standards for CFTC only to have them have to change from a global context, and embracing things like LEI. And of course, a lot of our conversation has been to talk about what is the data we need at CFTC, not necessarily how it's implemented at an SDR. So we're really thinking of it from the perspective of CFTC requirements as a regulator to utilize data. The implementation aspects of that are for the SDRs to work out. There will be future phases. Phase 3 will focus again on additional fields. Phase 4, we anticipate, will be a shift to another asset class, and we will continue on this effort. It's going to be an ongoing effort as we move along, and we'll be thinking about additional aid data elements as they come up. So the process going forward will be to take the best capabilities of each SDR, make them ones that we would like each of the SDR to adopt from a functional perspective so that we're getting the best of all of them and leveraging that to focus on the requirements of CFTC, as I mentioned before, and to continue to work through the action plans that we've already started to line up. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the SDR so that they can give you their perspective on the harmonization effort.
Thank you. My name is Bruce Tupper. I manage ICE's Global Repository Services. I'd like to thank the Commission and John's team for the opportunity to present a joint update of the harmonization effort. This first slide really speaks to just the topics of what we've covered in this effort. John mentioned many of the points in regards to our efforts to harmonize data, and I'd like to, just as a background, many of the SDRs up until the April TAC meeting were really focused on developing our systems, integrating customers, and quote unquote standing up an SDR. So to the chairman's point, today we've successfully taken in over $4 trillion of data. That was the big focus prior to the April meeting. And I think collectively, I can speak for all the SDRs, we heard the message very clearly that there hadn't been given enough attention to the data outputs that we give to staff. I believe that all the data truly is there. It's just we hadn't had the opportunity to actually collaboratively work together and John's team to figure out how we should disseminate that data to staff. So I do agree that topic probably wasn't given its attention. I think to the point, though, we were all very focused on how do we get all this data in, and more importantly, how do we assist our customers with their integration efforts. I think we all can agree that SDRs were an entirely new market infrastructure. Each of us had reporting capabilities, but there was no quote-unquote system, I think, that adhered to hundreds of pages of the reporting rules, Part 45, 43, and 46. So that was really the focus at the beginning of the year. I do want to just bring that to attention. I think in regards to data quality, John had mentioned, we'll speak a little further about that, but there's been a lot of strides made to improve the data quality. This was a topic of the April meeting, and I always equate data quality to an SDR as the level of margin of a clearinghouse. So when you're operating as an SDR, you can ensure data quality by having very high standards in regards to the validation and the sort of bar you set for participants to submit data into your repository. And then obviously the outputs are going to be much better for staff, and it'll give them the ability to really aggregate the data amongst the three of us easily because we're all working off of sort of common data elements. In regards to accessibility, this has been a very interesting topic. As a result of the harmonization effort, I think it was an unexpected benefit of working with John's staff, and not up until this date, we'd always work with the attorneys primarily with DMO and registration and compliance. And we had never really had the benefit of actually talking to the users here at the Commission of the data. For example, the Office of the Chief Economist, they had certain requirements as to the data sets and how they wanted to aggregate. The actual oversight analysts, people who are looking at the data, each of us had, I think, different elements of our own regulatory component or user interface. And we got a lot of feedback from the users in regards to how we can improve each of our modules so that it would have the ability to give staff to search on certain data fields, be able to drill down on the data. So that's been an ongoing process, and one I think that was a very positive benefit that we hadn't planned on. In regards to analytics, this has been one where we've worked very hard with particularly the Office of the Chief Economist and DMO. I think there's two very specific examples we can cite. And in regards to the analytics for the weekly SDR operational report, this was requested by this was requested by DMO in regards to the type of data we take in. So specifically, we each provided statistics around the submissions, but we broke down submissions by the rule type. So for example, we had Part 43, 45, and 46 submissions, which that was a little challenging, but I think the benefit was leading up to the go live of say end users, staff could track the amount of submissions coming in for historical reporting, and it gave them a real indication in regards to, are the end users making efforts to adhere to their upcoming compliance date by reporting all of their swap data back to the passage of Dodd-Frank. And the last report we're working on, which is one that's more of an analytical report, obviously it's with the Office of the Chief Economist, is the CFTC swaps report. And that's going to be focused on CDS for the first phase. It's a very comprehensive report that pulls, I would say, a lot of data in regards to swaps that are reported. And that's an ongoing process, but that's one that I think we'll hopefully release in the near future. But those are two specific examples of our efforts. Go to the, which one is it? And this next one. Perfect. I think in speaks to just our work from April till present. I think the two main issues we identified were obviously aggregation of data and obviously the need for standardization of values. So I think we spoke to that first point pretty well. In regards to data values, an example I can give is the adherence to the CC utility. So in this point, I think really what the goal is we're trying to do is we're trying to standardize when you look at reporting the actual values that you report, and on the low level and the high level, the fields or what is in the report. So if we try to drill down to that second level and we say, okay, how good is the quality of the data? And John mentioned this earlier. One of the first areas that we tackled were the CC adherence to the CC utility or the use of LEIs. This was challenging because the staggered dates of reporting, where you had the swap dealers obviously reporting their data well ahead of the end user community. They were reporting trades on behalf of the end users, and not all of those end users had registered for an LEI or their temporary CC. So we worked with the technology office to develop a report that would show who had registered, who hadn't, and it was really a helpful report in order to create a list of end users who needed to go and actually register their CC or either update the name because the name had been incorrectly registered by the swap dealer. I think some key outcomes of all this harmonization effort is really a series of meetings that John's team has organized with the SDRs. I can speak for myself. This is not something we would have done without the organization of the commission. I can honestly say that it has been a very collaborative effort. I believe it's been one that we've seen many more results than we expected. I think at the beginning we were all sort of leery to get in a room and work with our our competitors on this effort. But I do believe we all recognize the need to have provide staff with data that is in a format that can be easily aggregated and that also would give the commission the information it needs to provide oversight of the markets. I would like to make just one point in closing. I think in regards to rulemaking, early on the SDRs were very involved with the rulemaking process, particularly parts 43 and 45. Recently with the block rules, there were about 7-page amendments at the back of that rule set that related to the real-time ticker of part 43. We were never consulted on those rules. We're supportive of more data, particularly with the real-time ticker and the importance. What we would request is just that we be consulted. There was only 60 days given to implement, I'd say, a fairly substantial technology change. At this stage of the game, we're also trying to manage the real-time ticker and the systems, but also implement new rules. So I really would hope that staff would engage us early in the process so we can have the proper amount of time to do that and give guidance and input onto how we can best achieve those future rulemakings. Yes.
Hi, Marisol Camacho. I'm responsible for the U.S. Swap Data Repository at DTCC. Can you just, is that my slide? Okay, good. So I'm actually going to cover the actual effort that we've undertaken in terms of reviewing the data fields. I would concur obviously with what John mentioned in terms of the harmonized effort, and also Bruce. I'm a newer member to the team, and I have witnessed for myself the collaborative effort. I've been in sessions where actually the commission staff was asked to leave so that we could collaborate on fields, and we presented back to John and his team that collaboration effort. So I would say certainly my observations coming into it is that there is very much a real desire to want the commission and to be able to utilize this data effectively, and the group is certainly working towards that effort. We have, as 3 SDRs, we have actually looked at the data. We have proposed back recommendations where we had certain issues in terms of description. And we also looked at it from the perspective that whether, some of the fields we looked at are not necessarily expressly defined in Part 45 or Part 43, but we did see it as an effort that we can derive those values and we can provide them to the commission, and therefore we propose them as data elements going forward that we can report. So I think that demonstrates the commitment that we do have in terms of ensuring that staff can have this information available to them, whether on the portal or through any other output mechanism. One of the key things that we want to ensure, and John mentioned this in his update in terms of the key outcomes, is that we are not impacting our market participants as we're going through this review. And obviously, with new regulations coming into place, we've got the CEF rules coming forward, and the block rules as mentioned and others. We want to ensure that the market participants are able to be to confidently rely on what's been there, and if there are changes down the road that do impact market participants, that goes through a rulemaking so that they have the opportunity to respond to that. But again, as John mentioned, the focus has very much been on what are the data elements that the SDRs can derive from the information that it already has, and how do we present that back in a harmonized way so that the CFTC can utilize the information and aggregate the information across the SDRs. I guess in terms of next steps, we want to ensure that we've gained consensus with John's team in terms of the final scope of the data fields for phase 1 and the definition, so we can proceed with our action plans. The other key piece of that is we also want to ensure that the action plans are tied to the usability. So Bruce made some examples of the efforts with the economist group, but we want to ensure that there's actually results driven to this, so that whether it's the economist or the surveillance team or DCR from the risk side, that the action plans that we're developing are tied to those results. So when you ask what has happened since then, we can actually show some results from that. That's it, I think, Laura.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to present to this panel. I will try and make this brief. I know we're pressed for time. So my fellow panelists talked to all the enhancements that we've made and all of the progress that's been made to date. I get the dubious honor of talking about the challenges as we move forward, as new rules become implemented, and as we move forward and deeper into the harmonization effort. So I just wanted to reiterate that the phases that we're doing are not for new data fields. They are for values that are data that's currently being submitted to the SDRs. However, there is discussions within, there's been requests from staff for additional fields. We are in discussions with respect to that. I would ask that the commission ensure that should we decide to put new fields into place, that the industry input be taken into account. I know there were comment letters provided by some of the end user community with respect to their request for the same type of latitude to be able to provide comments on those fields, the cost and the complexity to them. We're very sensitive to all of the efforts that have been made to the end user community. We know how hard it has been for them to implement some of these changes. So additional fields are additional challenges that they'll have to overcome and would come connected with additional costs to them. Multiple resource demands. So we as an SDR do not have unlimited resources. So we have to balance new rules coming up. Bruce mentioned the block trade rules, some of the implementations with respect to those, with requests from the Commission, as well as harmonization. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that going forward, we have additional demands on our time, and any demands will then therefore push back any of the other issues that are being asked. The chairman mentioned the swaps execution facilities. The go live date for them is October 2nd. This will have an impact on our data quality. That impact at this point is unknown. The CEFs ultimately, when they go online, will help with data quality, as far as the fact that when they go online, you'll have a smaller subset of reporting counterparties. So to the degree where there are problems with data quality, we can work directly with those SDRs and quickly get the data quality up to speed. Having said that, there has been some concern that has been expressed within the marketplace that some of the participants are not in a position to suppress data. So when the reporting obligations shift to the CEFs, there are, particularly within the end user community, there's concerns that they haven't built their systems to be able to suppress reporting. So there's the potential for dual reporting that obviously would harm data quality at the SDRs.
And I think one of the things we mentioned as part of, we did receive some comments from the end users, which has kind of forced me to rethink how we're going to make sure we get public comment on all of this. We have a letter from EEI in specific, the Edison Energy Institute. And I mentioned in my opening statement that we want to make sure we have a forum in which people can comment and feel that they can review the developments thus far. John did not put up the slide that everybody's collaborated on the phase one. We're going to put that on the TAC website. So you can go there. It's got some descriptions about the changes, the fields, et cetera. That's the venue in which we want people to comment. We will put the letters up there. We will put up the EEI letter to make sure that they're reviewing it and make sure that this process is done as transparent as possible. Now, this is not guaranteeing a rule change. This is the process that John's working with the SDRs to really enhance our ability to see the data. If we are going to make a requirement to change data fields and to change requirements of reporting entities, we will have to do that through a rule change. Correct, John?
That's my understanding,
And that
yes.
requires notice and comment. But what we were trying to do using the website is to vet these changes so people are informed and aware before they're surprised by a rulemaking or some sort of change by the commission. So the goal is transparency, and the best way we figured out how to do this without obligating the commission through a formal rulemaking, is to use the TAC website. So again, another example of where the TAC can serve a good interface between the market and the agency in vetting these things. I'm going to go to the next presentation. If you have any questions, just write them down. We'll come back to this panel. But I'd like to go to Richard to summarize where we are and the goals and objectives of where we're going to be broadly with federal coordination on data. Richard, thanks for coming today.
Okay, Commissioner O'Malley, thanks very much for having me. Thanks also to the other commissioners and to Chair Gensler for having me today. I also want to thank John Rogers for his leadership, not just in this work that's been discussed today, but also for his leadership in the study group that he is co-chairing with Benoit Correa from the ECB and who's now chair of the CPSS to achieve the ability to harmonize data, to standardize them, and to aggregate them across SDRs and across borders, because We live in a world of global markets and global institutions, and there's no escaping the fact that if we don't standardize data and harmonize them across those borders, then we won't be able to use them. The title of my slides today, and I don't know if you have them up on the screen, but I labeled it SDR data collection, coordinating, and moving forward. I think the punchline is going to be that federal coordination, primarily through the Financial Stability Oversight Council, and I'll talk about that in just a second, really involves the same kind of harmonization and standardization of data from cradle to grave that is so important for all of our data efforts. So I think this is just a metaphor, for doing that. Just to step back a little bit on the first slide, answer questions that you should all be familiar with. Why are we collecting these data on a granular basis in the first place? Obviously, this is a statutory requirement, but from the perspective of the Financial Stability Oversight Council, the goal is to assess and monitor threats to financial stability. And from our perspective at the Office of Financial Research, our goal is to serve the needs of the Council and to fill in the gaps in data collection and analysis and in data standards among and between all the members of the Council, which of course includes the CFTC, the other regulators, and the other supervisors. So this is true across all asset classes, and it's true across all borders. It's also true from the perspective of doing analysis and for monitoring from a supervisory perspective. Our goal is to look at exposures, to look at interconnectedness and concentration, all of which we think in combination may be things that we want to look at to assess and monitor those threats. We need, therefore, very granular, detailed data, transaction level and position data. We need to be able to aggregate those data on swaps and on other derivatives in a whole range of asset classes. We've been looking forward to the implementation of the SDRs, which are obviously changing the game at this point. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But the ability to compare and aggregate those data across the SDRs, across borders, is absolutely critical to our ability in the Council and to our counterparts around the world to assess and monitor those threats. And the ability to share those data with and across the Council and across the globe is absolutely essential, and standards are a key in enabling us to do that in a way that makes them intelligible and also preserves the data's confidentiality. So on the next slide, the potential from SDRs is clear. They are high quality, low cost data collection points and can give us data in a way we've never gotten before. They allow us efficiently and coherently to collect very granular data and to use them and to store them, both on transactions level and positions, and also the terms and conditions into which those transactions were entered. When we lack data standards, we clearly don't have the ability to aggregate, to compare, to analyze, to process, or to report those data. When we lack data standards, we can't assess the quality of those data. And when we lack data standards, therefore, basically, we can't do our job in the Council in order to assess and monitor threats that might arise in these markets or in their connections with other markets around the world. Standards are clearly the remedy. I think that's something on which we all agree. From a global perspective, I mentioned John's work on the study group that's working now under the auspices of the FSB. The other co-chair is Benoit Cœuré. Benoit gave a speech yesterday in Paris that I commend to your attention that deals with some of these issues and that speaks to the need to use standards to avoid the data fragmentation across borders that otherwise will occur. Implementation early in the process of data standards is critical. They allow us to coherently collect data in any SDR and to aggregate and compare data across SDRs and across borders. The implementation reflects the need to use standards for entity identification. Bruce mentioned the use of the CC and the LEIs. Obviously, those are important. Equally important will be the use of instrument and product identifiers, some of which exist, but not all of which exist, and the use of hierarchies to organize those data in a coherent framework and those identifiers in a coherent framework so that we can compare and aggregate similar but not exactly alike either entities in a particular industry segment or instruments in a particular asset class. We at the OFR have a statutory mandate to promote the use of data standards and to assist the Council in developing them. That means that we've been very active in working on the Global Legal Entity Identifier Project, and we have a requirement to produce a catalog of both entities and instruments and databases for the benefit of the Council, for the benefit of the SDRs, for the benefit of analysts in the data community. And that's those are projects that are well underway, and we will welcome your input in doing that. We are also interested in providing a set of best practices or principles for data collection and for data aggregation. On the last slide of my handout, you can see some of those principles. They're pretty familiar, I think, to all of you, and they are just based on common sense. Right in the middle, you can see the need to leverage data standards. I think this is a very important point. Some of these things are not starting from a position de novo. There are standards that already exist, both with respect to entities and instruments. And we're not seeking to replace those or wipe those off the map. Rather, any coherent set of standards that are developed need to have a crosswalk between what exists already and those which will be developed and agreed upon so that we can leverage those existing standards, which were, after all, developed by industry to meet their specific needs. Hopefully, by doing that, we can achieve more standardization, more commonality in definition, more precision in definition of instruments and entities, and more ability to achieve the kind of quality and scope in data that we're all looking for. So I want to keep my remarks brief so that we can get back on track here, and I welcome any comments and questions you have.
Thank you, Richard, very much. Nicholas?
First of all, I would like to thank the CFTC and in particular Commissioner O'Malley for inviting the European Commission to speak today on these important issues. What I would like to do in my presentation on this first panel is to explain where the EU is in the definition of an international framework for trade repositories and the reporting obligation. Then I would like to explain where we are in the implementation of this framework, and to finish, I'd like to say a few words about the challenges ahead of us in the implementation of this new framework. EMIR sets out a fully fledged system of cross-border recognition of trade repositories and of reporting obligations. First, EMIR defines a recognition procedure for trade repositories established outside the EU. This procedure is very important because it will enable EU counterparties to use non-EU trade repositories to fulfill the reporting obligation. The recognition of a trade repository is subject to three main conditions. The first one is an equivalence decision. It means that we will check that requirements in the third country equivalent to EU requirements apply to the supervision of the trade repository. The second one relates to the requirements guaranteeing data protection in the third country. And the last one, last but not least, the conclusion of an international agreement guaranteeing the direct access to trade repository data by EU counterparties. The second element of our international framework in the field of reporting and trade repositories is a guarantee that foreign authorities can access to data stored in EU trade repositories. The condition is the conclusion of the international agreement I mentioned when we refer to authorities of countries where a trade repository is established. When no trade repository is established, a cooperation arrangement between ESMA and the foreign competent authorities is necessary. The third piece of this framework includes anti-duplication provisions that apply to the reporting obligation. The purpose of these provisions is simple. It's to enable counterparties entering into a cross-border trades to comply with one single set of rules with regard to the reporting obligation. So the condition to that is the adoption of an equivalence decision by the European Commission. This decision would recognize that there is a similar equivalent reporting obligation in the third country jurisdiction. And once this decision has been adopted, if you have a trade between a counterparty in Madrid and a counterparty in Philadelphia, they can choose to, the European counterparty can choose to comply with EMIR or CFTC requirements to meet its obligations. Now, where are we in the implementation of these requirements? The European Commission, in cooperation with the European Securities Market Authority, is actively working on the development of the equivalence decisions needed for the recognition of trade repositories and reporting obligations. On the 2nd of September, ESMA delivered a technical advice on these issues for a number of jurisdictions, including the United States of America. ESMA's advice establishes that the US supervisory framework for trade repositories, as well as the reporting obligation, is to a large extent similar to the EU framework. However, the advice mentions certain issues, such as the fact that the US framework does not include similar provisions on the operational separation of ancillary services of TRs, and also mentions the fact that some reporting fields differ between the EU and the US, and notably the fact that in the EU we require reporting of data on collateral posted to cover trades. Another important issue is the indemnification requirement that applies to authorities willing to access data stored in US trade repositories. This may be an obstacle to direct access to data by EU authorities. We have worked quite extensively with CFTC staff on these issues. CFTC staff has proposed solutions which partly address this issue. This solution would enable EU authorities to access data reporting to USTRs in accordance with EU reporting obligation. However, this solution would not enable EU authorities to access data that have not been reported in accordance with the EU reporting obligation. So, for instance, if you have a trade on a contract with an EU underlying concluded between two non-EU entities not subject to the reporting obligation in the EU, European regulators could not have access to this information, despite the fact that this information may be relevant to them if they want to have a comprehensive view of the market for this specific underlying. So the European Commission is not legally bound by the advice that has been provided to us by ESMA on the 2nd of September. However, it is a very important piece of work. It will inform our decision, and we will pay due consideration to the issues that have been identified in this advice in the upcoming weeks and months. Regarding the international agreement, we have already prepared recommendations to the Council of Ministers with the view to be in a position to shortly open negotiation with third countries, including the US, on mutual access to trade repositories data. Now let's turn to the other challenges ahead of us beyond the implementation of this framework. I think here I will concur with a couple of points that have been already mentioned by the previous speakers. Reporting and access to data are extremely important, but the harmonization of data is no less crucial. The future landscape of the trade repository industry is likely to be quite fragmented worldwide. We'll have several TRs for the same class of products. Hence, regulators will need to be able to reconcile data collected from multiple TRs if they want to have comprehensive and meaningful information. In the European Union, the counterparties to a trade are required to generate a unique trade identifier to enable trade repositories to aggregate and compare data across different trade repositories. We have this obligation, however, to make it real, we will need to work further on global aggregation of data across trade repositories established in different jurisdictions in cooperation with other relevant authorities. In that respect, the working group that has been established recently by the FSB will do a very important job to harmonize reporting and trade formats. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Anybody have any questions regarding any of the presentations? While you think of that, I have one quick question, Richard. How does OFR get access to the data in the trade repositories, in U.S. trade repositories? Do you have direct access and you're looking at the data today, or are you working with, and maybe you might comment on other bank supervisors, OCC, Fed, et cetera?
Sure, it's a great question, Commissioner O'Malley, and I think it's an important one. We enter into a memorandum of understanding. There is a blanket MOU that covers all members of the Council of the Financial Stability Oversight Council, but it's generic and really, in order to cover the specific needs for specific data, we enter into MOUs. Thanks to the good work of people like Marisol Collazo, we've entered into, for example, an MOU with DTCC to obtain access to the trade repository data in DTCC in the trade warehouse. That required approval from you and from the Federal Reserve and from the SEC as the three primary regulators for DTCC. And that process is something that we pursue in basically all of our MOUs. So it's a process that really respects the differentiation among different data types. It's a process that specifies who has access to the data, who will get access to, with whom we can share the data or not, and therefore protects the confidentiality of the data while permitting access for the analysis that we do and the financial stability monitoring that we do on behalf of the Council.
Richard, just so I'm clear, there's just one MOU that gives all of the regulators access? You referred to it as a blanket MOU?
There is Commissioner Wetchen, there's a blanket MOU, but each specific set of data usually requires unless it's so generic and anodyne that it really doesn't require any other specifics. Typically, we enter into other memoranda of understanding on a bilateral, multilateral basis, which accommodate the specifics of the data in question. So
one that's more specific, is that just OFR then that enters into the MOU with the SDR?
It depends on the circumstances. It may be OFR, it may be multilateral, it may be bilateral. Each one is crafted in order to give access to the right people and prevent the wrong people from getting access to the data.
On the issue of Congress required indemnification of the SDRs, is that a factor for you? And maybe Nicholas, maybe you could respond. How does that impede international cooperation?
I'm glad you asked the question because it is an issue. In other words, had you downloaded data, for example, that we could look at together with John and his team, to try to work together to assess the quality and where the problems might be. In order to get access to the SDR, there needs to be some kind of waiver of the indemnification procedure, and that is an issue.
Nicholas, is this something that you at the EU have concerns or thoughts about?
Yes, indeed. I think we have exactly the same issue with regard to the indemnification requirement because it could prevent direct and unfettered access to data by EU authorities because it would mean that EU authorities would have to enter into an indemnification agreement with TRs. And the problem we have is that in accordance with our rules to recognize a foreign TR, there must be direct access. So it is questionable whether we could consider that this condition is met if we have an indemnification requirement.
Any thoughts or questions for this panel? If not, we're going to move to the HFT discussion. Oh, Wally?
Just a quick question. Ms. Torfer, you mentioned, and this is for everybody, but it's a subject you mentioned. You talked about resource constraints as things are developed in responsive to new regulatory matters. I'm just sort of interested in how that works, in that if there's a new regulatory requirement, all of the SDRs would have to comply with it, and and it would not be a competitive disadvantage for anybody.
I was just merely pointing out. I was just merely pointing out that harmonization as an effort has to be weighed against all of the new regulatory rules coming online and all of that, that there's a balance between all of that, and a push in bringing harmonization to the forefront quicker means, there's a balance.
And that's what I'm interested in
Yep.
understanding better how the balance should be measured.
I see.
And so the question is it effects on the SDRs, or is it effects on the customers of the SDRs?
I think it could be both, right? So to the degree, the harmonization that we're talking about now is really contained within the SDR community. So for instance, what we're talking about is either presenting fields in a new way, so data that we already get that's produced in a way that is similar throughout the SDRs, or deriving values. So from our perspective, what we're talking about here when we talk about harmonization is really it really has to do with data we already get. So when we're talking about resource constraints with respect to the phases that we're talking about, I think it's specific to the SDRs. To the degree where additional fields are required, that would also impact end user community and other entities that we're reporting.
Yeah, if I could just add, the chairman mentions an evolution, right? And I think the key thing is, as we are navigating this landscape, as new rules are coming out and additional implementations are underway, we want to ensure, and I had mentioned tying it to results, that the priorities that are set by the Commission, by John's team, and so forth, will be tied to, I guess, the most impactful results, right? And so if the DCR team, for example, is benefiting from the harmonization effort, then we know that that's a key priority, and we should continue on those efforts. So it's a matter of balancing priorities both within our own organizations, but also with the Commission in terms of where they're going to get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak, in terms of our efforts.
I understand. I'm just asking whose buck. Maybe I'm being simplistic about your business model, but I should have thought that all these costs would be passed through. And I'm not for wasteful expenditures, but my point is to be very clear that it's really not a constraint of the SDR, since there's no competitive advantage associated with it. But ultimately, the cost gets passed through to the rest of the industry. I'm trying to just understand exactly where the costs and benefits
It's
lie.
cost and timing.
Pierre?
Yeah, can you? Can you comment on the topic of strict data validation as a way to improve data quality, and what has been done so far over the past months to improve that? And because I think that's a key to improve the overall quality of the data. And I think you voiced very well the concern about the SEF coming into play and the risk of duplicate reporting. And in a working session that we had with the DM office recently, you outlined the fact, for example, if you know that the threat has been done on a SEF, the fact that you could reject those threats if reported by reporting participants. So that's maybe something which might not be doable for October 2nd, but those type of things could go a long way to improve the data quality. Can you comment on what has been done and what will be further done in that respect?
Yeah, so in regards to the validation, I think all the SDRs are going to validate the USI that comes in. So you get a trade, you validate it. I think the earlier point that was made, that Laura made, is that, okay, now we're going to implement the CEF reporting. Now the PET reporting obligation is going to shift to the CEF. And the swap dealers are probably in a position where they could potentially handle a delay, speaking a number of our customers primarily are end users. They coded their systems with the expectation that the CEFs would be reporting that value for them. So we definitely, all of us validate USIs, and we know whether a duplicate USI is trying to be resubmitted, or we could reject that. That's part of our initial or essential validation on a trade submission. I think the issue is going to be is if there's changes with that existing rulemaking, how the industry as a whole will handle that change, and how they could potentially handle a delay with CEF reporting for particularly the Part 43 message.
Yeah, and I do think there are process flow challenges, right? And perhaps, I've spoken on this topic before, and I know I don't want to jump ahead because I do know you're having a CEF panel later today on this subject. But when you look at the whole universe of what has to be reported, and we're looking at the permitted transactions, in terms of validations, you need to understand process in order to understand what validations you're going to have in place. And there are scenarios, you have to work through all the scenarios, and there are scenarios where validations are going to be challenging if we don't understand exactly how these trades are executed. So for example, if a CEF is executing a permitted transaction that it executes as 2 trades, the dealer still has a reporting obligation on the continuation data. Are they holding that trade as 1 or 2 trades in the system? Now remember, they're reporting already. So there are scenarios that need to be worked through and that need to be understood in terms of what impact is this going to have in its entirety. What are the steps that the dealers are taking? What are the steps that the SDRs are taking? And how quickly is that being taken into account? Because I think without understanding that, we are going to have data quality issues, and this implementation is going to actually really, make much more difficult some of the work that we're already doing in terms of the harmonization.
Brian?
Thank you, Commissioner, and want to commend the panel for all the work and the progress that's been achieved. I know it's been a daunting exercise for all of you, and there was just a point, if I may, that I just wanted to call out to the committee, and we have been working closely with the European Commission on this issue. But I think it's a good point to be raised, and we're seeking clarity and resolution of this matter. There's a cross-border reporting issue that has surfaced related to the reporting of our U.S. futures under EMIR. And due to the lack of the EU-level recognition for non-EU trading venues, the concern is U.S. futures will not benefit from the delay that ESMA has proposed for European Commission approval. Nicholas, we've spoken with your colleagues, members of the European Commission counterparts of ESMA, and all are understanding of the concern. They're receptive to the concerns and the issues that we've raised. But this is one of 2 major issues that has surfaced that people need to be mindful of. The other is that U.S. futures, because of this lack of recognition, U.S. futures will count towards the OTC thresholds as a result. And that creates a great deal of consternation among our customers and those that fall under that category. So we're imploring both the CFTC and the European authorities to collaborate on a solution that will recognize exchange-traded derivatives that are listed outside of the EU. And again, we're very, very encouraged that the authorities are receptive to these concerns, and we believe they're trying to work towards a resolution, but we don't have any understanding of where that is.
I think you are raising 2 slightly different questions. The first one is about the date of the implementation date of the reporting obligation for futures in Europe, because this is a European specificity that we have a reporting obligation to trade repositories for futures. And the second one, which is slightly different, is the recognition of US exchanges in Europe that has an impact on the nature of the contract, because without this recognition, they would be considered as OTC derivative contract from the perspective of EMIR, and therefore would be subject to all the requirements applicable to OTC derivatives in EMIR. With regard to the first one, ESMA has sent to the Commission a request to amend the date of entry into force of this obligation to report futures. We received this request 1 month ago. I think we are still in the process of analyzing the demand and see if we can amend the requirement or not. So I cannot say if it will be done or not at this stage, because this is still work in progress. On the other issue of the recognition of US exchanges, it is an issue which relates actually not to EMIR but to MiFID. And actually in MiFID 2, there will be this recognition procedure for exchanges will be maintained, and it will be implemented. I think with regard to the US, the procedure has even been launched to have a recognition of US exchanges. So we are in the process of addressing this issue.
Thank you.
We're going to close off this panel, but John, you raised when the next phases are. You don't have any timetables on that. So I want to talk to you. We'll do this separately, but how quickly we can move to the next set. I know you're taking this in a deliberate fashion, but there are many fields, many products that really need to have the benefit of having the standardization and complete review, so we can pass this over to potentially the Commission action if necessary, which I do believe it is necessary to fix some of the flaws in Part 45 and other reporting rules. But I want to make sure we get this right, and having your work completed is essential to that. So you're doing a great job, and to the SDRs, I compliment you as well. But there's a lot more to do, and let's make sure we keep it on an aggressive timetable to the extent we can. We're going to try to put up all the comments, all the thoughts, all the data on the TAC website. If you have any concerns about it, if it's not working, it's unclear, let me know. I don't want to put up data that doesn't help you. So it's just an invitation to call, write, yell, if that's not as clear as it could be. But with that, let me thank our witnesses, and we're going to switch to the presentation on automated trading. Thank you very much. Where's Sebastian? You ready to go? Everybody knows coffee in the back, restrooms down the hall. You have all sat through a budget meeting that has been much longer than this, so we're going to keep moving. But as soon as Sebastian gets set up. Do you have slides, Sebastian?
Good morning, Commissioner O'Malley and members of the Technology Advisory Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Commission's concept release on risk controls and system safeguards during today's meeting of the TAC. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge fellow Commissioner staff members who worked diligently to help complete this document. They include Mary Lee Dahlman and other staff from the Division of Market Oversight, Sai Srinivasan from the Office of Chief Economist, and Cam Nunnery and Richard Haynes, who until recently were also Commission staff members in the Office of Chief Economist. I'd also like to thank you, Commissioner O'Malley, and members of the TAC. As you know, the TAC's work is cited frequently in the concept release, and we certainly believe it helped produce a better document than would otherwise have been the case. The concept release was approved by the Commission on Monday, September 9th, and published in today's Federal Register with a 90-day comment period. Over the next several minutes, staff will provide a summary of the document as an entry point for your discussion. Fundamentally, the concept release asks whether existing risk controls and system safeguards in automated trading environments are sufficient and properly calibrated to match current and foreseeable market technologies and risks. The concept release was informed by a number of factors, including controls already in use by one or more market participants or platforms, existing CFTC regulatory requirements that address automated trading, and best practices developed by expert groups, including the TAC, FIA's Principal Traders Group, FIA's Market Access Working Group, and others who have also addressed risk controls in automated markets, for example, IOSCO. In this regard, the concept release acknowledges and seeks to better understand progress made to date and asks whether or not additional measures are necessary. The concept release begins with an overview of automated trading environments, including the development of automated order generation and trade matching systems, advances in high-speed communication networks, the changing role of humans in markets, and the growth of interconnected automated markets. The concept release also highlights the importance of automated trading systems, or ATSs, as tools for the generation and routing of orders. Further, it notes that in 2012, almost 92% of on-exchange trading in U.S. futures markets was executed electronically, and discusses the sub-second speeds of dedicated communication networks now available between geographically dispersed market centers. The concept release addresses these developments through a series of risk controls and measures broadly grouped into 4 categories. The first is pre-trade risk controls, including controls designed to prevent potential errors or disruptions from reaching trading platforms or to minimize their impact once such orders have reached the market. The second category is post-trade reports and other post-trade measures, including reports that promote the flow of order, trade, and position information to market participants and clearing firms. The third category of risk controls is system safeguards, including safeguards for the design, testing, change management, and supervision of ATSs. Finally, a fourth category of additional measures is also presented. The concept release seeks extensive public comment regarding each risk control, system safeguard, or other measure presented in the document. The concept release provides a platform for discussion in several respects. First, for describing relevant changes in commission-regulated derivatives markets, particularly as they relate to the increased automation of markets. Second, for cataloging the Commission's regulatory responses to date, as well as existing industry practices that address automated trading and risk controls. Third, and this is a very important purpose, for determining the effectiveness of existing industry practices and the extent of their implementation at present. And fourth, for determining the need, if any, for additional measures or regulatory action. Finally, as the Chairman noted in his statement of support, the concept release is intended to further public discussion and debate on how to best protect the functioning of today's highly automated and interconnected markets. As a threshold matter, the concept release recognizes that orders and trades in automated environments pass through multiple stages in their life cycle, from order generation to execution to clearing and steps in between. Accordingly, it solicits public comments regarding the appropriate stage or stages at which risk controls should be placed in the order and trade life cycle. Focal points for implementation of risk controls described in the concept release include ATSs prior to order submission, clearing firms, trading platforms prior to exposing orders to the market, clearinghouses, and other risk control options such as third-party hubs through which order information could flow to uniformly mitigate risk across various platforms. The appropriate focal point for a risk control may depend on the type of control or its intended purpose. The concept release seeks public comment on this question and the desirability of a layered or defense-in-depth approach that places the same or similar risk controls at more than one stage of the order and trade lifecycle. The Commission's concept release presents a total of 23 risk controls and other measures, including 7 pre-trade risk controls, 4 post-trade reports or other post-trade measures, 7 system safeguards, and 5 additional measures for discussion. As detailed in the appendix, some risk controls include one or more subparts. Specific examples of risk controls presented in the concept release include message and execution throttles, self-trade controls, maximum order sizes, post-order and post-trade drop copies, and uniform trade adjustment or cancellation policies. They also include ATS order cancellation capabilities such as kill switches, auto-cancel and disconnect, and repeated automated execution throttles. Further, included are ATS design, testing, change management, and supervision standards, as well as incoming market data and other data types reasonability checks. Additional risk controls and measures are described in the document in some detail. The concept release also solicits comment on a total of 124 questions distributed throughout the document. These questions address the 23 enumerated risk controls and measures summarized above, as well as related matters of interest to the Commission. Notably, the concept release asks market participants to comment on the implementation and effectiveness of their existing risk controls. As noted previously, thorough cataloging and understanding of existing industry practices is an important objective of the document. The concept release further asks market participants to identify the uses and benefits of each risk control they currently implement, and to identify the types of market participants that would generally benefit from such a control. Conversely, it also asks whether certain risk controls or other measures presented in the document are unnecessary, impractical for technological reasons, or otherwise inadvisable. The concept release also solicits detailed comments on the costs associated with implementing each control. The Commission's concept release further solicits public comment on definitions developed by the Tax Subcommittee on Automated and High-Frequency Trading, including, for example, with respect to the definition of high-frequency trading. It also requests public comment regarding the registration of firms operating ATSs and not otherwise registered with the Commission. Further, the concept release seeks public input regarding any additional risk controls that would be particularly helpful in protecting the financial integrity of clearinghouses, and any additional risk controls that should also apply in the case of direct market access, or DMA. While soliciting public comment regarding the need for additional measures, if any, the concept release also provides a summary of steps already taken by the Commission and market participants to address automated trading. For example, in April 2012, the Commission adopted rules requiring Futures Commission merchants, or FCMs, swap dealers, and major swap participants that are clearing members to establish risk-based limits based on position size, order size, margin requirements, or similar factors. These rules also require entities to use automated means to screen orders for compliance when such orders are subject to automated execution. The Commission also adopted rules in 2012 requiring swap dealers and major swap participants that are clearing members to ensure that their use of trading programs is subject to policies and procedures governing the supervision, maintenance, testing, and inspection of the program. The Commission has also adopted rules with respect to trading platforms, including rules with respect to DCMs adopted in June 2012 that require DCMs to establish and maintain risk control mechanisms and to prevent and reduce the potential for price distortions and market disruptions. These include, but are not limited to, market restrictions that pause or halt trading in conditions prescribed by the DCM. The Commission finally has also adopted trading pause and halt requirements for swap execution facilities similar to those for DCMs. The DCM rules also create new risk control requirements for exchanges that provide DMA. These rules require DCMs to have effective systems and controls reasonably designed to facilitate an FCM's management of financial risk. Finally, the concept release notes that the Dodd-Frank Act itself addresses disruptive trading practices and other market abuses. In addition to Commission actions, the concept release also provides an overview of existing industry practices designed to mitigate risks in automated trading environments. It notes that certain measures or variants of them have been discussed by industry associations and other organizations, or may already be in operation at one or more exchanges, clearing members, or other market participants. For example, the concept releases system safeguards pertaining to the cancellation of orders or disconnecting a market participant in emergency situations are similar to proposals made separately by FIA's Principal Traders Group and Market Access Working Group and by the Tax Pre-Trade Functionality Subcommittee. Examples of existing risk controls within a sample of futures exchanges are also discussed. In this regard, the concept release notes significant work already done by the TAC to catalog industry practices and available on the Commission's website. Finally, before concluding, I just would like to remind parties reviewing the concept release, because it is a lengthy document, that the questions presented throughout are all repeated in order at the end. And similarly, the appendix includes charts summarizing all of the risk controls and other measures discussed in the document. These compilations may make it easier for you to prepare your comments to the Commission. Commissioner O'Malley, that is staff's summary of the concept release. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to open up questions to the floor. Thoughts, concepts, concerns. Our opening bid with Cliff Lewis down there in the end.
And this is an observation. I'm looking at Brian Durkin, and before he turned gray, I remember when we were basically working together on taking the bond contract electronic. And I think my general point is while it's commendable, particularly given the great work that the tax subcommittee has done on this, that the current release suffers from what I'll characterize as, are you still beating your wife kind of public policy analysis. And the key question, of course, is do the high frequency traders, and I've got no horse in this race. I'm not a high frequency trader, but I am a student and frankly fan of electronic trading. And I'm a huge fan of the CFTC regulatory framework, which puts the emphasis on central limit order book trading as the fundamental foundation for what I think is a huge advancement over open outcry trading or manual trading, which is electronic trading. And my general point is, don't forget the benefits of the high frequency trader community. In the old days in open outcry, these guys were basically called locals if you were polite, scalpers if you were not being so polite. 100 years of research demonstrates that the market would not have functioned in its primary role of providing liquidity to end users absent that market-making liquidity. Now today, much of that function is provided by the high-frequency traders. And I think as you undertake, an exhausting 120 plus questions, I think it's very important to identify the benefits from high-frequency trading, because in effect, you really don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this. Electronic markets will not work absent electronic trading, as the definition that the subcommittee struggled with demonstrates. There is really no easy way to separate buy-side algorithmic execution, which is essential to get size done, with what the high-frequency guys are doing on the market-making side. So it's a double-edged sword that you're doing. And one last important point, I also would urge the CFTC to not conflate their, I think, extremely well-considered framework of looking at electronic exchanges and the incentives to CLOB-style trading with the SEC world, which absolutely makes no sense. Basically, it's the difference between a economically and technologically rational of what constitutes an efficient market versus one that's designed for the full employment of lawyers. And many of the so-called problems in the marketplace relate to the fact that the CFTC framework works fine, but the SEC framework really doesn't work. So don't give ground on this, is my advice to the commission. I think you guys have really done yeoman service. This is a big victory, and I don't think you want to undermine your own success.
I have a slightly different take on this from Cliff. First of all, I'm really happy that this is a concept release instead of a proposed rulemaking. Secondly, I thought the document was actually pretty nicely done, nicely designed. And I have to confess that I have not had a chance to fully read and digest it, but I just had one thought. And that is, you raised the issue about a definition, coming up with a definition of high-frequency trading, which has been really difficult to do. And the only thing I would say is that you only need a definition of something if you want to regulate that thing. And it's possible that there are components to high-frequency trading that you care about, like the just number of transactions per unit of time, the various ratios that you've looked at, and that kind of thing. You can actually write rules about those characteristics without having to come up with a definition for something that is really pretty elusive and changing, for whatever that's worth.
Thank you very much. To the point on getting a definition, as you well know, the subcommittee was one of the charges was to come up with a definition. And what is it relative to automated trading system, an ATS? And it took a long time. It is a very difficult situation, and we still have not put in those thresholds that many people were looking for. Hoping that we would get comment from the TAC definition, which really didn't outcome, we decided to put it in here. I think there's many people that for it or against it identified the challenges with it. So I thought this would be as good a any in terms of an opportunity to get comments and really thoughts on it as a concept release. And so that's kind of how it ended up in the document. Wally, your card's up. If I guess the best way to do it is put your cards up. I'll start trying to get around the room as quickly as I can.
Thanks. This is sort of a complimentary question to Mr. Lewis's. It occurs to me that one of the things, and I'm trying to understand if you can give us some help about how to evaluate the work here and some of the questions. As I understand it, almost definitionally, speed, there's a relationship between speed and risks of things going wrong. And that's embedded in your work here. So the faster things move, the greater challenges there are, if you will, in terms of risks of things going wrong. It also occurs to me that speed, as it relates to its value to people who engaged in trading, speed is valuable because of relative speed. In other words, if I'm faster than others in the market, that's a value to me. But absolute speed doesn't necessarily have particular value. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, to individual traders. It's just relative speed to other participants in the market. So I've got a question for you as we go through this, and I'm just going to pose it and see if you can help. If I'm thinking about what is the value to the public, not to an individual trader, because that's about relative speed, I think. The value to the public of a round-trip trade that takes 125 milliseconds as opposed to 25 milliseconds, how should we think about that in terms of the value to the public and speed when balancing off against the inherent risks of increased speed?
I think that's probably a question for the TAC, and anybody want to reflect on that question. Brian, I'm just gonna, if you want to respond to another TAC member's individual concerns, and I can't wait, let me know. But we'll try to get these issues out there and just try to keep a tally on your notepads, if you will.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, gentlemen, for the fine work that you did on this concept release. It did, and I've just done the first blush review, so forgive me, but it really did leave a question hanging in our mind in the context of, because a number of these things have been presented or represented in the document as concepts, I really don't think that it does justice to the work that the Commission, that the exchanges, that the industry has done to evolve over the years in the context of the excellent mechanisms that have been put in place to address a number of the issues that are, the subject of this concept release. And so, I just really need to emphasize the importance of recognizing that, most, I would say, of the items that have been addressed in the concept release or posed as concepts, and should we be doing these different items, have already been addressed in the context of risk management controls that the exchanges have put in place, credit controls that the exchanges have put in place. Many of these things through either best practices or rulemaking of the Commission itself. But these markets have evolved, and we've taken some very, I think, proactive, aggressive steps to ensure the integrity of these markets. And I would just like that somehow to be noted or reflected, because for those that aren't as closely related to these topics as many of us are, one could read this and suggest that, we really haven't made progress on many of these issues, and it's simply not the case. You know, when you talk about credit controls, messaging controls, stop logic functionality, velocity logic functionality, circuit breakers, price protections, air trade policies, we've been pretty methodical in putting those mechanisms in place. And so, you know, I just simply ask that effort and that progress that the Commission and that the exchanges working together, that's not lost in the context of the progress. And this will continue to evolve. I mean, we've all proven that as the innovation continues, we are doing our work as an industry, working with all of our partners around the table to further augment these strong mechanisms that we have in place.
With this chairman's permission, I just want to say, I agree with you, Brian. I think there's remarkable efforts that have been put in place, not just by the exchanges and clearinghouses and clearing members, but the Commission itself. But one of the things that I felt, and I'm so pleased that Commissioner O'Malley and Commissioner Chilton, who really took the lead in getting this document together, but why we're putting it out and to spur public debate is to see if there's anything, one, additional that we need to do, and two, to go to Chris's point, as we're moving to an environment with swap execution facilities, which is more fragmented than we've traditionally had in the past in the futures market, are there any rules that we might need to put in place so there's not a race to the bottom? Because everything that you just went through, an organization like the CME might put in place, but then what if somebody else doesn't, and if there's some jockeying? So that's, to me, two of the fundamental questions. Is there anything additional? And secondly, is there any sort of just across the board that we might need that's, even if you already have it or ICE has it or somebody, just is there something that we already just need at a federal level so there's not a race to the bottom?
Thanks. First, I do want to commend the Commission and the staff on the concept release. I think it was well done and raised some very important issues. The issues that I'll focus on are the pre-trade controls and what I call the post-trade controls. Those are two fundamental protections that I think we see them adopted in Europe, in Australia, in Canada, and in the U.S. securities markets. Pre-trade controls are embedded into all the obligations of registered entities. So I thought it was important that rather than focusing on market structure type issues like minimum quote life, which we'll debate for quite some time, or other complicated issues like definitions of HFT, pre-trade controls and risk controls is an area that should be carved out and moved forward on because they are important. I do recognize that the exchanges have adopted a lot of credit controls, but those are credit controls from the viewpoint of the exchange and not the firm itself. And the firms should be obligated to have their own credit controls. So if I have one leg on the CME and one leg on ICE, I need to calculate that in my own pre-trade credit control. So I think firms having pre-trade controls and filters and order filters before they enter an exchange is an important concept that the Commission should recognize. It's recognized throughout the globe. The second piece is the importance of post-trade. It's rare that you see a regulator talk about the importance of drop copies. It's not a topic that you hear about a lot. Just a reminder, pre-trade control obligations were in place for the Goldman event and the Knight event. Both firms were under those pre-trade obligations when they had an issue. There was no post-trade obligation, meaning real-time reconciliation of what you think you traded and what the exchange is telling you you traded. This is an important concept that we all focus on pre-trade and pre-trade filters. Post-trade is critical in these events and that real-time reconciliation. So I think those two concepts are concepts that we as an industry should move forward on and think about. And some of the other concepts, while we should continue to debate them, I don't think they should be slowing down the importance of pre-trade and post-trade.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I'd like to also say I thought the document was very good, and there was a lot of work gone into it, so that was very good. I have, I guess, an observation and a question on the document, and maybe that's one for Sebastian or you, Commissioner. But I think there's a convergence happening in the market in a lot of projects I've certainly been working on with large institutions between what you might call, the real-time risk and pre-trade risk that's in part of this, and market surveillance, sort of real-time surveillance. And it's all, if you like, real-time analytics and response on big data in motion. So one of the examples in this document is you might include it in real-time risk to try and see if a wild algorithm has gone outside of its operating parameters and shut it down because it's placing too large orders, too many orders, going outside of its specification, if you like. And you might be able to shut that down, and indeed that kind of thing may have helped Knight Capital. So I've worked on lots of systems like that, but then, so that's automated, but what about things where humans come into the loop? And you can get, been seeing lots of interest recently post-LIBOR problems around, expending surveillance systems. So they're very real time. So they track things like communications between traders in ways that might go outside of, unusual events, unusually large trades, unusual events, unusual types of communication, just spotting unusual events. But that's something a human has to judge on. So is that outside the scope of this document? Is this only limited to what we can automate and shut down? Or should there be things around what you can spot, whereas you might flag up very quickly to a human for their opinion, if that makes sense?
So I think, the broader the comments, the better. And to your point, we do have both a risk control and some questions around supervision of ATSs. And the idea around the supervision element is, in fact, a real-time human monitoring of the machine and an alert capability so that, as you say, human operators can be notified, and it's not presented as an either or, it's just another idea. But there is room for that concept that humans are notified and then humans react, in addition to whatever automated processes might be in place to help mitigate or control the situation.
Greg Wood next. We're going to kind of work the way down the line on this side.
Thank you very much, Commissioner O'Malley. I'd like to echo the comments already made. This is a paper that we've been waiting for quite a long time for. I think we first heard about it when we did the presentation at TAC in June last year. And my first impression of reading it was this is very good. It's obviously made a lot of reference to industry papers. It makes a lot of reference to industry practices. As I was reading through it, to Brian's point, I was going, okay, I know which exchanges do this already. I know, what particular cases are being referenced here. So in terms of scope and breadth, it is a very good paper. And the fact that it's presented as a request for comment, I think, is a great opportunity for us within the industry to provide you with feedback about the areas that we think need to be addressed. And that isn't necessarily the whole range of automated trading because, the markets have evolved to a certain way. There are now a number of participants. At my firm, let's not forget it's not just high frequency traders that are using automated tools. I talk to pension funds, I talk to corporates, I talk to CTAs, a lot of different participants who are now using automated trading technology of one sort or another to participate in the market, to work their orders smarter into the market, to give their end users better results and more fiduciary responsibility over what the traders are trying to do in the markets. I think one of the things that I just wanted to say with regards to the HFT definition that we put together, it's easy to take it out of context. There were several parts of that subcommittee working on automating high-frequency trading. We came up with what we felt to be a very neutral, mechanical definition of HFT, which is nice to see has also been adopted in other jurisdictions such as Germany, where it was very much verbatim, recognition of that definition. But I think one of the things that the concept piece will allow us to do is also highlight the other parts of what the Committee on Automated and High-Frequency Trading was aiming to do, was to recognize that high-frequency trading is a mechanism, and there are other aspects that we need to look at. Risk controls, quality controls, very important. There is a human oversight always to automated trading. No one, you hope, ever turns on a machine and just walks away and gets a coffee. When there are failures, there is human responsibility for those failures. And then there are accidental disruptions to the markets, and there are abusive practices to the markets. And they have to be very carefully controlled and surveyed and recognized accordingly and the appropriate action taken. And I think we have the chance for this concept release to highlight that they're the areas that need to be looked at more than any sort of broad brush regulation around automated trading. Thank you.
I reiterate, this document is very much needed by the industry, and I hope that, the comments that we receive is going to just, further enhance the document for all of us. I'm going to actually focus on a different aspect of the document, and that is related more with the software development and the software testing. I think that in this area, it's very critical that we continue to enhance it. Being able, given the fact that the world is moving a lot more electronic, and also technology enhancements is allowing speed to help trading basically happen at a much higher speed. It's very important that the interoperability risk is also considered when any new release is made, when any change is made. That is something that, internally at BlackRock, we're looking at very seriously, because, oftentimes you'll have individual components of the market. They will develop policies and procedures that work. But then when you connect it into the entire trade flow, there may be a break. I mean, just as an example, if we're going to look at CEF trading that, is eminent for all of us, it does involve being able to trade and participate with multiple entities. So the interoperability risk and the ability to have proper quality testing, front to back, is so critical before day one of mandatory, trading. So if we could just, put some focus as we comment in that area, I think we will all benefit from it. And then, the definition of what is actually a trading firm and a customer is also going to be important. Is it just the next user in the chain, or is it actually the end user who's taking the risk?
I too want to say that I thought the staff did a very nice job on the concept release. As we're making our way through the document, we're reading it, looking at it, trying to find opportunities we can improve as an operator of futures exchanges. I take great comfort in going through the document and realizing, wow, we've implemented most of this stuff, and that wouldn't have been the case 5, 6, 7 years ago. So that I can see the evolution of the industry that Brian alluded to. And by the way, as I go through it, I have the same thought that Brian does, which is that it's not just ICE, but it's CME that's been implementing these things along the way, and that gives me great comfort in terms of the risk management framework for futures exchanges. However, as the chairman mentioned, Chairman Gensler mentioned, we now have the advent of CEFs, and clearinghouses, and we operate an OTC clearinghouse, are required by law to accept trades from CEFs. And we have, as Chairman Gensler was enumerating, something like 20 CEFs. Some of those we may not have ever even heard of before they filed the application. And on the in the CFTC rules, it is suggested that a clearinghouse accept trades for clearing and not have the ability, and even on the sidelines we're hearing, and furthermore, that clearinghouses shouldn't even have the ability to reject trades from a CEF. So I agree with the spirit of Chairman Gensler's comments, which I think were, I'm paraphrasing, feel free to tell me if I'm not getting it right, which is we should take a look at this. And I think the idea of being more prescriptive or at least persuasive about how CEF set up their risk controls is probably a good idea. In the case of the futures exchanges, being more prescriptive would most likely largely be a codification of the practices that we already engage in, and perhaps not time well spent, although I'll leave it to the wisdom of the Commission in that regard. And I'm not suggesting we can't improve. In fact, we've seen several ideas in the last year or two that we like and that we intend to implement, whether from the FIA recommendations or even as recently as this week from the concept release. Last thing I'd like to say just briefly, I just want to differentiate between fast and slow. So the report talks a lot about what's a high frequency trader and how should we measure it. And I've never spoken to Brian about this, but I bet he's the same way I am and our colleagues are, which is we don't stay up at night thinking, how are those fast traders going to get us? We stay up at night thinking, how are traders going to get us? What is a risk problem that's going to occur? And as I sit here thinking about what are the biggest problems I've seen in my time at ICE, the four biggest that I can think of, at least with the U.S. exchanges, are a guy or a woman, although it was a guy in all cases, of course, in Calgary, in London, in Memphis, in Sao Paulo, pointing and clicking and disrupting the markets and not having the proper risk control. So let's not lose sight of that. The important conversation is how do we have more risk management? It's not who's a fast trader and who's a slow trader.
Thank you, everyone. First, I do want to echo what everyone's saying here and thanking the Commission for putting out a really thoughtful and comprehensive document. I think it will be the beginning of a very good and beneficial process in which we can have a good discussion about how the markets have evolved. At the risk of repeating what a lot of people have said here, I agree with what we've heard, that there are a lot of existing practices in the industry today. The concept release goes part of the way in cataloging those. I think the responses to the concept release will be helpful in filling out the picture. I do want to make the point that we need to keep in mind market quality. That's sort of an important function. Cliff started by talking about this, that the markets today, the U.S. futures markets, are very good by just about every metric that I'm aware of. And we need to keep that in mind. That's one of the important goals of a market, and we want to make sure that whatever rulemaking comes out of this, that it helps to preserve some of those gains. A couple other observations that I'd like to make. One is that there's an incredible amount of detail in this document, and it makes me a little bit uncomfortable that what might come out of this is very detailed, very specific, and very static rules about what risk controls and safeguards should be. And I think that would ultimately make things less safe than they are currently. So I would urge more of a thoughtful, principle-based approach to what risk control should be in the market. And as we go forward, I think that'll be an important part of the discussion. Commissioner O'Malley has asked whether we should federalize some of the existing practices. And I think that's going to be an important part of the discussion about where are there gaps between current practices? Where are there races to the bottom, as Chairman Gensler mentioned, that need to be managed through a regulatory process? I think that will be an important, fruitful part of the discussion that's to follow. One last observation that I wanted to make, sort of in response to Wally's comment a little bit earlier. He made the point that speed, absolute speed, is inherently dangerous. And I know that in the physical world, that's very much the case. I think about it the same way. We all know intuitively if we drive our car real fast, it's going to be more dangerous. Last year, I remember seeing a news article about some experimental military aircraft that was some unmanned aircraft that was traveling 7 times the speed of sound, and it exploded. And, my first reaction was, well, of course it did. It was going 7 times the speed of sound. And, I think our physical world recognition is that speed is dangerous. I'm not sure that's inherently true with computer processes, and I think that'll be another good part of the discussion. I don't think about it that way. I think if we've got humans who are chasing computers to do the risk management and the surveillance without using computers, then clearly that's a real issue. But if we've got the right automated computerized risk checks and surveillance capabilities, then I think it's a good discussion. I'm not convinced that faster is inherently more dangerous in an electronic automated environment, and I'm looking forward to talking about that. Thanks again for the opportunity to talk about this, and I look forward to sort of a very thoughtful and evidence-based response to the 124 questions in the document.
We're going to go with Evelyn next, then Gary, Keith, Irene, and then John.
Thank you so much. Just have a couple of points being towards the end of the table. A lot of the things I had wanted to say have already been expressed, but just a few things. First of all, I do want to thank the Commission for the well thought out paper. I did read the first 100 or so pages and then was glad to see that the rest was a sort of reiteration of some of the questions because I just ran out of time. And I will take the opportunity when I get back to the office to go through it in more detail. There is one thing that I would like to call out, and I think Commissioner Gensler mentioned it in the opening statements, but I think it probably is important to call out in terms of the concept release. It's mentioned in there, but I'm not sure if it's mentioned with enough emphasis, and that is a managing of the expectations. And what I mean by that is if we were to go ahead and implement everything that's in the concept release, would that prevent the types of errors, technology issues that have been listed in the concept release? And I would dare say probably not. And as we read, and the concept release does an excellent job of giving a historical view of some of the recent events that have happened, so people could read it potentially as, technology run amok. And when you think about the amount of technology that we have in the marketplace compared to the amount of events, it really is not the case. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think we need to let people know that as we continue to use technology in the markets, things are going to happen. We could do as much testing as we want, and I was going to make some comments that echoed what Superna was saying about testing and the highly integrated marketplace and the need for, interconnections types of testing as well. But there are unanticipated events and unanticipated combination of events, either internal or external, that no matter how much we do, we're not going to be able to anticipate. And I think it's important for people who read the concept release, comment on it, and actually as we progress in implementing a lot of things that are in there, there is an understanding that things are going to continue to happen and that we should expect it.
Thank you. I also want to echo what's been said many times. I thought the concept release was just excellent and very, very thoughtful, and certainly the commission staff, which probably has lots to do these days, to take on that task too. That's tremendous. I guess one of the advantages I have in my new position is I get to step back and be more holistic on matters. And when I read the concept release, I was sort of thinking about a recent enforcement action brought simultaneously both by the CFTC and the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, and the press releases that were issued simultaneously announcing that action, which had to do with the trader putting orders into the market and then pulling them out really quickly. And the CFTC's headline prominently used the word spoofing, and the FCA's headline prominently used the word layering. And I thought about the amendments to the Commodity Exchange Act, which use the word spoofing. And the only reason I use that is because to me it's the danger, and I think Tom has said this really, really well, it's the danger of labeling, categorizing, and getting much too down in the specifics and micromanaging. Because we can look at the same thing and we can call it different words, and you don't want to end up with rules that are so specific to specific words that you actually miss the conduct that you're trying to get at. Whether we call it spoofing or layering or whatever, we don't like people to place orders into the marketplace and pull them out without the intent of ever executing them. We don't like people to put orders, that match on both sides of a trade for the purpose of giving appearances without actually wanting to take a market position. Whatever you call it is irrelevant at the end of the day. And I think that one of the things that worried me as I read through the concept release was the eagerness to look at micro names as opposed to holistic conduct. Even the section on registration, which I thought was interesting, and I thought that would be something that ultimately would be controversial.
To me, the issue isn't whether you register high-frequency traders or even some other subcategory of automated traders. The question is, are you going to extend the process that has begun with the registration of swap dealers and major swap participants and actually say that there's categories of traders that should be registered because they do something in the marketplace that has a big impact? What they're called to me is irrelevant. And I think, that's just one thing, I think that's important because I do think the concept really sort of predisposes the current fact pattern, onto Cliff's point. Forget the introduction of e-trading, the electronic marketplaces. I remember when the big controversy was whether brokers should wear headsets or not, because it was considered that the brokers that had headsets had an advantage. Folks have always been trying to figure out a better speed. The issue again is equality. Can everybody access the market or have the potential to access the market the same way? So again, my only thought is, as everyone goes through the concept release, are we getting overwhelmed by our own titles? We're getting overwhelmed by our own names. Let's just concentrate on the conduct and the problems. Whether it's a slow guy or a fast guy, and maybe it will be a woman someday also. Problems are problems, and let's just think more holistically.
I think Keith is next.
Thank you for having the opportunity to comment. I was waiting quite a while, as Greg mentioned, to see what the concept release said, and I have to say that I was generally pleased. And one of the most important facets that I found in the concept release was that it took the overall view of looking at automated trading and didn't focus on, it does have areas that talk about high frequency trading, but overall, it started with the issue of automated trading, which I think is the right, the right circle in the Venn diagram to look at. I wanted to just echo, the comments that were made around the table. I won't repeat them, but I did want to go back to some comments that were made about kill switches. And just in general, as you solicit comments, it's interesting. We say kill switches. Well, yes, we absolutely have to have kill switches. But when you start to look at the details of any of these particular risk management features, they're not so easy. If I kill someone's trading strategy, am I killing their orders that are risk-taking or risk-mitigating? And if I've killed their activity that's risk-mitigating, what other, trickle-down effects am I causing by doing that? So it's not always so easy to just say, yes, we have to have this parameter, yes, we have to have this feature that's going to kill something, and all will be good if we use it when we need to use it. There's a lot of nuances and intricacies in the things that are in this concept release that you're going to get comments on, and you might miss some of those details depending on where those comments come from. The other thing I'll say is I'd like to just add on to what Evelyn said. You could do everything that is not currently being done, and yes, there are a lot of things in the concept release that are currently being done, but you could do everything, and you're still going to have issues that are going to come up. And I think you even mentioned that, Chairman Gensler. But I think one of the things that means is this really speaks to the need to do very careful cost-benefit analysis of any proposal. That maybe it costs too much and the benefits that we actually get just don't materialize. And so I hope that as anything progresses to proposed regulation, that there's going to be some very careful cost-benefit analysis of anything proposed. Thank you.
Irene?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this release, and being a high-frequency trader, this may be a dubious compliment in the eyes of the press for the Commission, but I think it was very well balanced. Two things I'd like to point out. First of all, from my perspective, commodities right now are way ahead of equities in terms of market structure and as applied to mitigation of risks of high-frequency trading. I think I'm echoing Cliff's point there. The second point I'd like to make is there's a lot of emphasis on speed and who is fast and who is not fast, and we have a lot of debate of going on whether fast means bad but it doesn't go beyond that. So I think what would be really interesting is to identify and perhaps with the industry participation, and there are a lot of industry practitioners who have observed bad behaviors, specific bad behaviors that may be caused by high-speed traders or low-speed traders, but something that would actually constitute examples of manipulation, and spoofing definitely is one of them. But basically, at this point, there's a lot of negative connotation as it is associated with fast traders, but the examples of what these fast traders can do are very few and far between. So I think it would be interesting, even without naming names, if Eric, you don't want to name names, it's fine, call them names, but it would be interesting to catalog a set of examples, exactly what is there that people are doing that is wrong, and then somehow structure risk activities around that. Because I think there's right now is this one catch-all net for, and a lot of people do believe that all high-frequency trading is negative, and without really going into granularity about what high-frequency trading activities are bad and which are good. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lothian.
As I was reading this, I was trying to think of myself as perhaps a prop trader who was thinking about starting his own particular group. And as I was going through all of the 137 different pages of it, I said to myself, you know, starting that car wash looks a lot more interesting right now. This is a lot. And I really worry, particularly as we get into the weeds of some of the different specific rules for all of these different things, as to whether we're making things so complex as to drive new, smaller entrants out of it. And what are the rules that are going to be applied to a new entrant? You know, is it a doctor opening a doctor's office, or is it a doctor that has to build a whole hospital in order to be able to support everything that you want that doctor to be able to do, kind of thing. So I'm worried about the impact on the new entrants to the marketplace coming in. I'm also worried about, you know, what's the application to what is the definition of a customer, and where does this apply? If you have a retail customer, for example, using automated trading tools from an ISV, okay, at what point does that kick in, and who's responsible for that? Because that's, you know, certainly there's greater and greater tools for building algorithms. It doesn't have to be high, you know, frequency trading or fast trading or slow trading. It's just automated trading. And, you know, the other thing that I'm, as we were talking about kill switches and all this kind of stuff, I'm reminded of a case, you know, unintended consequences of where you just, stuff happens, you know, kind of thing. A broker in my office had a computer that was frozen. Okay, well, what do? Well, you push the off button. Come on, I mean, that's what you do. It's the kill switch. You turn it off, right? Except it's Microsoft Windows and it won't turn off. So what do you do? All right, well, you use a little bit of logic, and I told him to unplug the machine. Okay, sometimes even, you know, great engineering tools and stuff like that, you're just not going to come up with, you know, every necessary scenario, you know, kind of thing. So getting too specific about some of this in terms of what it has to kill and how it has to kill can do more harm than good sometimes. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. So the cost benefit analysis, you know, we built an entire site Markets Reform Wiki to help people manage all of this regulatory change that has occurred since Dodd-Frank. And, the more and more, the prospects of getting into a career in regulation look better and better all the time, just because you have to have that element to be able to get into these markets. And so now you're talking about a much larger organization, more capital, those kinds of things. And, we've already seen a consolidation of sorts in the prop trading area. Okay, so with all the connectivity that you have and the compliance that you have and everything, are you going to see the same thing in the prop trading area that you saw in the FCM area, which was a consolidation, concentration to the point where we have so few FCMs that it's very difficult to be able to find places to be able to do certain types of business. Too big to fail, comes into mind as well with that kind of thing. So how you're treating the lesser, the smaller with all of this is a big question in my mind.
I'm going to have to sneak out, but I just wanted to, I'll be back for the CEF panels later, but just a little bit of reaction from this one commissioner. This debate, just this discussion here tells me this was the right thing to put out. I mean, you don't all agree, and we wouldn't expect you all to, but we're going to benefit as a commission from hearing this. I think a couple of things. I think we put this out kind of at the right time. I mean, if we had done it a year ago, that would have maybe been the right time, but we've now completed the rule set on the swaps reform where we could. I mean, there are a couple of rules where we have to work with other agencies, but that which we could do, we got out. And the markets are largely adjusting. So there's some real big thematic changes happening. And I'm not talking about electronic trading. I'm talking about central clearing. I'm talking that we might have 15 to 20 SAFs initially. I'm talking about that we won't have just the market structure around ICE and CME and, of course, Minneapolis, Kansas City, and so on. But, that we're going to have a lot more interconnectivity, a lot more interoperability, as Superna and others have pointed to. So I think this is a really good time to hear your views. John, no, I don't think a doctor should have to build a whole hospital to open a doctor's office. But that's why there's also questions about, is there something that exchanges and clearinghouses do in an environment so that others don't have to do it? Or maybe it's the futures commission merchants in some cases so that others don't have to do it, so we can learn from that. And I'd be very interested in the debate as to whether we need to define high-frequency traders. I've tended to be, with all respect to Commissioner O'Malley's work, I've tended to think of this more about automated trading or people who have direct market access. Somebody who has a pipe directly into Globex, somebody who has a pipe directly into a clearinghouse, that's where I sort of think, okay, are there more risk filters that we need? So, but I thank you all, and I know you've got about another half hour or something before lunch comes.
Thank you. Let me take the question and go to the next level. Cliff brought up the point about principles-based regulation. We have two exchanges here which I think defend themselves and probably quite proud of their risk controls that they have in place today. At what point do we say we need some of this and some of that? What is the minimum? If they have two different control systems, are they both good, or do we mandate them both, or do we say no, ICE must adopt the CME standards? And what about every CEF out there? To Tom's point, what controls are we expecting there? So we need to begin to ask the tougher questions, and looking for your advice on this. How flexible can we be? How tolerant can we be? What do we have to do to validate that we're okay with what's in the market today, even if we don't federalize them or we decide to federalize them? What do we federalize both CME, ICE controls, and then apply them to every CEF? What's everybody's thinking on this? Cliff.
Don't do it. The exchanges have done it's a tribute to the supremacy of the way the U.S. futures markets works. Is again, you guys can't deal with success. And the fact of the matter is I would think a public policy purpose would be to encourage a little competition. So having the scope for exchanges or clearinghouses differentiating their product offering through different techniques or different controls is the right thing. And obviously, you know, what you do for oats trading is not probably what you want to do for the bond contract, so that there's going to be a good deal of differentiation in the solution that, frankly, government regulators should steer clear of, because that's really the purpose. I mean, unless you want to take over the whole industry and make it a subsidiary of the U.S. government, there's ultimately a point where listed for-profit companies have to engage in competition. And the other thing that I think that's a little bit striking is the ultimate penalty for, you know, trading gone bad is the guy loses money and goes out of business. Now, the government has a legitimate interest, as the regulations and as the legislation stipulate, for market manipulation, for abusive conduct. But other than that, the ultimate sanction for computers gone wild is the guy has to close up shop, or the FCM loses some money. I mean, again, I think your point on federalizing this is a very important one. Clearly, you have to look at it. But I think where you are now, which is essentially trusting your designated contract markets and others, is the right place.
You know, I think you know, we will probably end up more in a hybrid situation where, you know, certain rules or whatever, they'll be more subjective or principle based. You know, if you look at CME and ICE, I would imagine like a lot of the controls, even if they're different, they're kind of trying to achieve the same thing. So, you know, something like that, you know, if it's more principle based or subjective, you know, basically highlighting that you do need to address it, but leaving it up to the entity on how they address it is, you know, good. But then when you go down the chain and you look at like entities like CEFs that are smaller and not necessarily able to stand on their own, but yet have the ability to introduce substantial amount of risk just by having, you know, the wrong procedure in place. You know, at that level, you may want to have a little bit more granularity. Like, you know, what we're dealing with right now is we have like, you know, so many different CEFs. So, you know, focusing on about, you know, 6 to 8 of them, and essentially having to write down, okay, these are the 7 or 10 critical pieces that we need to see from a risk management perspective, from a control perspective, and building those matrices ourselves, versus like if there was, you know, a list that was given to every CEF just because they're new in the market, saying that you need to have something in place that is able to have either, you know, risk mitigation or control, depending what, you know, what the criteria is in place, that is transparent to the market. So you're going to end up with a hybrid, so you don't, you know, in any way, you know, the competition's allowed to exist, you know, but yet at the same time you're providing, you know, safer environment, you know, for the rest of the world that has to coexist.
The thing that I was going to say, it's a shame that Ananda actually just walked out of the room, is that we've just gone through an exercise about pre-trade controls and direct access to marketplaces as part of that. So with Rule 173, which was obviously a rule focused on the clearing members as opposed to the actual end users, you know, it provided us with a framework that we spent a lot of time interpreting and asking for guidance on from people like Ananda and the rest of the division at the CFTC. But the nice thing about it was it wasn't necessarily prescriptive. It put in place that there needed to be risk management. It put it out there that we need to have risk management in place, and we had to get extension for certain exchanges in the US to put pre-trade controls in place. Other exchanges already had them. It was deemed that that was suitable under Rule 173, and other exchanges had to put those same controls in place. I think with that framework, and maybe just an extension of that framework, that will cover probably most of the concerns coming around risk management onto CEFs.
I think from my perspective, it's a hybrid problem, because on the one hand, I think the CEF only has the CEF doesn't have a view of the kind of credit risk. It really has more of a view of the kind of operational risk. We only know one piece of the puzzle, and I think that ultimately, you know, clearly there needs to be controls at a CEF level around kind of what's going through the pipes and making sure that, you know, to the extent possible, we're avoiding any issues. And we've long, you know, we advocated using NFA and other methods like that to try and kind of avoid a race to the bottom, because I think we have a real responsibility to make sure that our systems aren't creating problems. But I also think that from a risk perspective, it does belong in the clearinghouses as well, because they have more of a holistic view as to what individual participants are doing. And so I think it's a very hard problem, and I do think it has to be more principles based, because I think we're entering a brand new world where a lot and I mean, I'm sure we'll come up this afternoon, but there's a lot of open debates right now within this space. And I think that, having a principles-based approach is the only real way to kind of ensure that people are thinking about these problems holistically and not just trying to manage rule by rule as well.
Sebastian, can I ask one final question? The floor trader definition, what is the thinking behind why that's the appropriate regulatory hook to require registration? Floor trader, you might want to walk through why you or OGC, whoever came up with it, is the appropriate hook.
I think, Commissioner, the intention really was to solicit comment on whether there should be registration of a category of participants that are not currently registered, but that might, in the view of some benefit, the system might benefit from their registration. I think the floor trader category is an option that we're soliciting comment on. But I think, as with the rest of the concept release, the document doesn't particularly pitch it as the solution. It simply solicits comment.
Well, if we say it it does pitch it a bit if it comes out in a document, no matter what you think. But it does make that kind of our position a little bit. But thank you for that. Commissioner Chilton, I don't know if you have any questions for the panel.
I don't have any questions, but I mean, just a general comment. I mean, so everybody should be patted on the back. Fast is good. Kill switches are already in place or they're not needed. The cheaters are just like the floor traders. They should just be treated the same. We shouldn't be big government. We should just go back to principles. I mean, I just come from, of course we've thrown everything but the kitchen sink in this concept release. We're not going to do everything. But the decade of deregulation is over. I mean, we've seen where that took us. And the question is finding the right balance. The deal with dilemmas is always trying to get ahead of that, because most problems are solved as a result of bad actions. So from my perspective, we need to come up with something ahead of time before we see problems that result in an overzealous Congress coming out after the cheetahs or ATSs. So that's what, at least from this commissioner's perspective, is trying to find what the right balance is. But doing nothing, that's a non-starter with me. I really appreciate the comments, and I look forward to hearing more. And thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Can I chime in? I've got something on the CEFs from the PTG perspective this afternoon, but one thing I'd like to say is that this video thing in Chicago is very good, and it's a good way to participate, and I think it's possible if we promoted this a little bit, we'd get more participation here in Chicago, because this has been a good way to be part of all of this morning. And Bart and I have debated a couple of his points that he just made a little bit. We've had a good, healthy debate here occasionally. But I just wanted to let you all know that the community here in Chicago, which is echoing what many people have said, again, I have something else this afternoon, but the PTG group has been favorably impressed and disposed with regard to all of the questions that you all ask. And it's a good, healthy debate for the industry. So, but this video thing's been a good thing.
I would point out, Chris, the room is full.
Sorry?
We actually have people in our seats.
We have them. We're just not having. They're just not clouding the camera view. They're all there. Hey guys.
But there are people in Chicago that would come and participate, I think, if this was promoted a little bit. There are lots of interested people in the Chicago Fed in this issue and such who would participate if it were a little bit better known, I think.
We took the show to Chicago, if you recall, in a hurricane here. So it was our safety location. What are we calling that? Our backup location.
Well, and is your next one going to be at the FIA thing, the 2nd of November?
No.
Okay.
We haven't scheduled the next one yet. We did that before. So we got to share with other important cities. If there are no further questions, lunch has arrived, I'm told. We've got some time this afternoon. We have a good CEF discussion I expect coming up, but if you want to turn back to this, let me know. Everybody's going to be at the table. This high frequency and automated trading discussion is a TAC debate right now. We're not debating witnesses here. We're just kind of thinking out loud. So I greatly appreciate everyone's thoughts on this. I apologize that we weren't able to get it to you earlier. I think, Sebastian, you mentioned it hits the Federal Register today. So more people can read it. We gave it to you as soon as we sent it we gave it to the TAC members as soon as we sent it to the Federal Register. So I do appreciate further reflections, your comments on it. So thank you again for this morning's debate. For TAC participants and witnesses, we're providing the usual TAC lunch upstairs. So please proceed to the elevators. We'll start again at 2:00.